I have sat on this bench for 38 years. I have heard lies told with total confidence. I have watched defendants smile at me the way you smile at a problem you have already paid someone to handle. I have seen the full range of what people are, and most days I can tell you inside of 2 minutes which version is sitting in front of me. But on the morning of October 30th at 9:47 a.m., a woman looked at me from 8 feet away and said something no one has said to me in 38 years of running this room. She said, "Your Honor, with all due respect, my family funded 3 wings of the courthouse you are sitting in. 3. So you'll forgive me if I don't take direction from what is functionally hired help in a nicer chair." She said it calmly. She said it clearly. She said it in front of a court reporter, 2 bailiffs, and a 46-year-old woman sitting in the front row who had lost 9 years of her working life because of a single sentence this woman said at a hotel front desk. Her name was Caroline Ashworth Price. She was 38 years old. Her family's name is on 2 hospital buildings in this city, a public library annex, and, as she correctly noted, 3 wings of this courthouse. They sit on boards. They attend galas. They appear in the kind of magazines people flip through in waiting rooms. And Caroline Ashworth Price believed, with the entire architecture of her life supporting that belief, that none of this applied to her. Before I tell you what she said next, before I tell you what a hotel maintenance worker did in the 4th row of my gallery, a man nobody had subpoenaed and nobody had asked to be there, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment right now. Tell me where you are watching this from. Are you in Chicago, Istanbul, Lagos, Manila, London, Sao Paulo? Type your city. I want to see how far this one travels, because I have a feeling it is going to cross every border and every tax bracket there is. I read every single comment, and if you are not subscribed, hit that button now. What happened in this courtroom over the following 51 minutes is something I had never seen in 38 years, not once. Let me tell you about the woman in the front row first, because you cannot understand the weight of what was done to her until you understand who she was before it happened. Her name is Adese Nuosu. She is 46 years old. She came to this country from Enugu, Nigeria, at 28, with 1 suitcase and a cousin's address written on the back of a receipt. She has worked in hotel housekeeping for 18 years. The last 9 of those were at the Bellhaven Grand, a 400-room property downtown, on the overnight team. I want you to understand what overnight housekeeping actually is, because most people have never thought about it for even 10 seconds. Her shift began at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m., 6 nights a week. She serviced the public floors, the conference level, the fitness center, the 24-hour business lounge, and any guest room that requested turn down or emergency service through the night. She was on her feet for 7 of those 8 hours. She lifted on an average shift somewhere between 400 and 600 pounds of linen. She was paid $16.20 an hour. No health insurance for the first 6 years. No retirement contribution. No paid sick days until year 7, and then only 3 per year. In 9 years at that property, Adese Nuosu was never once late. She never called out. She took 1 vacation, 4 days, when her mother died, and she flew back on the 4th day because a longer absence would have cost her the shift differential that paid her son's tuition. Her son, his name is Daniel. He is 22. He is in his final year of a nursing program at the State University, and every semester of that program has been paid for in cash, one semester at a time, out of overnight housekeeping wages, because Adese promised herself, when she landed in this country at 28, that her child would not begin his adult life owing anybody anything. She had 2 Employee of the Quarter certificates. They were in a dresser drawer at home. She never hung them up. Daniel told me later that when he asked her why, she said it seemed like bragging. That is who was sitting in my front row. And I want to say one thing here, early, while you are still deciding whether to stay with this. The reason I can put a case like this in front of you at all is the members of this channel, not advertisers, members. The join button under this video is what pays for the file room, the transcripts, the records requests, the hours it takes to put one of these together properly instead of quickly. If you want the next one to exist, that is where it comes from. Join and stay with me, because we have not even reached the part that made a man in a maintenance uniform stand up in the 4th row. On the night of October 1st, Carolyn Ashworth Price checked into the presidential suite of the Bellhaven Grand with 4 guests. The hotel's event log describes it as a private gathering. The noise complaint log from the floor below describes it differently. 2 complaints at 2:15 a.m., a third at 3:40, when a security officer named Ruben Salas went up and was told through the door that everything was fine. The gathering ended at 4:12 a.m. At 6 a.m., Adese Nuosu ended her overnight shift and then picked up a partial extra shift on the 17th floor because someone had called out, and the supervisor asked, and she said yes, the way she had said yes for 9 years. At 6:41 a.m., she entered the presidential suite to begin service and found a full-length designer mirror in the primary bathroom, cracked from corner to corner. She did what her training required. She stopped. She did not touch it. She photographed it on her work-issued device. She logged it in the maintenance system with the note, "Guest damage prior to service." Timestamp 6:41 a.m. She reported it before anyone asked her to. She reported it when nobody was watching. She reported it because that was the job. At 11:40 a.m., Carolyn Ashworth Price came down to the lobby in sunglasses and reported to the front desk that a bottle of vintage champagne was missing from the suite's private cellar unit, that the bathroom mirror had been damaged, and that $800 in cash had been taken from a bedside drawer. She could not name the housekeeper. She did not know her name. She had never asked it, in the same way she had never asked it of anyone who had cleaned a room she stayed in. But she did not need a name. She only needed a category, and she said the word, housekeeping. The hotel suspended Adese Nuosu that afternoon. 4 days later, she was terminated, citing an internal investigation. There was no police report. There was never a police report, because a police report requires an actual investigation, and an actual investigation was never the point. Now I want you to stop for a second. I want you to think about someone in your life, a mother, a grandmother, an uncle, a neighbor, someone who did hard, invisible, unglamorous work so that somebody else's world could stay clean and comfortable and beautiful. Someone who was never thanked properly for it. Now picture that person losing their entire career in one afternoon because a person with more money than they will earn in 10 lifetimes needed somebody to blame for a broken mirror. If that moves something in you, drop a like right now. Not at the end, right now, because this case is about to turn in a direction that I did not see coming from this bench, and I need you here when it does. Caroline Ashworth Price's attorney was a man named Whitfield Grange, whose hourly rate made no economic sense on a case this size, unless the objective was to wrung the plaintiff out of money before the calendar ran out of dates. That is a legitimate strategy. It is also, in my experience, an admission. He filed a motion to dismiss. Denied. He filed a motion challenging the standing of the clinic to bring the action. Denied. He filed a motion to seal the hotel's internal records on the basis of guest privacy. Denied. Because guest privacy is not a shield you get to raise around evidence of what you did to an employee. On the morning of October 30th, Caroline Ashworth Price walked into my courtroom 11 minutes late. She was wearing an emerald tweed jacket with gold buttons. Her hair was styled. Her jewelry was heavy and old, and the kind you inherit rather than buy. She sat at the defense table and arranged her things the way you arrange them at a business lunch you are slightly bored by. She did not look at Adese Nuosu, not when she came in, not when she sat, not once during the 22 minutes Priya Raman spent presenting the claim. Priya Raman presented it well. 9 years of employment records, 0 disciplinary history, 2 commendations, a termination letter referencing an investigation that generated no findings, no witness statement, no interview record, and no police involvement. 11 rejected applications. Then I asked the first question. I said, Ms. Ashworth Price, you reported a theft of $800 in cash and a bottle of wine. Did you file a police report? She said, I didn't think that was necessary. I said, you accused a woman of a crime that ended her career in her field. Help this court understand why a police report was unnecessary. She said, I told the hotel. That's what they're for. I said, the hotel terminated her employment based on nothing except your statement. No investigation, no witness, no recovered property. So your accusation is the entire body of evidence. Is that a fair summary? Whitfield Grange rose. Your Honor, my client did not make the employment decision. I said, your client supplied the only fact that decision rested on. Sit down, counselor. I turned back to her. I said, Ms. Ashworth Price, when did you last see the bottle? She said she did not recall. I said, when did you first notice the mirror was cracked? She said she did not recall. I said, where in the drawer was the $800? And she leaned back in her chair, and she looked at me, and she said it. Your Honor, with all due respect, my family funded 3 wings of the courthouse you are sitting in. 3. So you'll forgive me if I don't take direction from what is functionally hired help in a nicer chair. The gallery made a sound I have heard maybe 5 times in 38 years. It is not a gasp. It is lower than a gasp. It is the sound 40 people make when they cannot believe what they have just heard and are still deciding what to feel about it. I removed my glasses. I set them on the bench. I folded my hands. I said, Ms. Ashworth Price, I want the record to reflect exactly what you just told this court. You told me that your family's donations should affect how I conduct these proceedings. You told a sitting judge that her function is comparable to domestic service, and you used that comparison as an insult in a room where the plaintiff has performed domestic service for 18 years. I said, do I have that correct? Something moved behind her eyes for the first time. She said, that's not what I meant. I said, then tell this court what you meant. She said, I meant that we are reasonable people, and this doesn't need to become a spectacle. I said, a spectacle. Ms. Ashworth Price, the spectacle was a 46-year-old woman finishing a 9-year career because you needed somewhere to put a broken mirror. That was the spectacle. What is happening in this room is the correction. Before I tell you what happened next, and what happened next is the reason I am still thinking about this case months later, I need one more thing from you. Answer me honestly in the comments. Have you ever worked for someone who never learned your last name? Someone who expected you to be grateful for the privilege of serving them. Someone who looked straight through you. Tell me your story, because Adese Nuosu's is not rare, it is ordinary. It happens in hotels and homes and offices in every city on earth, every single day. And the only reason we are discussing this one is that a 22-year-old nursing student made a phone call, and a 31-year-old attorney refused to take the quiet money. And share this video, not later, now. Send it to one person, someone who cleans, who cares, who carries, someone who has never been thanked properly. And if you have not joined yet, this is the moment I would ask. Members of this channel get the case file breakdowns I cannot fit into a video, and they are the reason I am able to sit with a case like this for 3 weeks instead of 3 hours. Adese Nuosu's file was 411 pages. Somebody paid for the time it took to read all 411. That was the members. Join under this video, and you are in that room with me for the next one. I said, Ms. Ashworth Price, this court issued a discovery order to the Bellhaven Grand 3 weeks ago. Do you know what a modern hotel's private cellar unit records? She did not answer. I said it records every door open by timestamp on a sensor log because the inventory is insured and the insurer requires the log. Nobody in that suite thinks about it. It is a piece of equipment installed for an accountant. I said, that unit was opened 4 times during your stay, 8:47 p.m., 10:12 p.m., 1:20 a.m., and 3:55 a.m. It was not opened once between 6 and 11 the following morning. The bottle you reported missing left that unit at 3:55 in the morning, 17 minutes before your gathering ended, and more than 2 hours before Ms. Nuosu ever entered that suite. Whitfield Grange was on his feet. I said, there is more. The hotel maintenance log records the cracked mirror documented at 6:41 a.m. with a photograph attached and a note reading, guest damage prior to service, filed by Ms. Nuosu herself 5 hours before you came downstairs. She reported your damage before you did. She reported it when no one was watching, and no one would ever have known if she hadn't, because that was her job, and she has never once failed to do it. I said, and regarding the $800, your own attorney's discovery submission included your bank records. They show an ATM withdrawal of $800 at 12:30 a.m. on October 2nd from the machine in that hotel's lobby, and a cash payment of $800 to a private event vendor logged in your own calendar at 1:15 a.m. I said, you did not lose that money, Ms. Ashworth Price. You spent it. The courtroom went silent in the specific way it goes silent maybe twice in a career. And then Carolyn Ashworth Price said the second thing, the thing that was worse than the first. Her attorney reached for her arm. She pulled away from him, and she looked at me, and she said, she should have been more careful about what she signed up for. People in that job know what they're getting into. Carmen, I am sorry. Daniel Nuosu, sitting in the 3rd row in his nursing program polo, gripped the bench in front of him so hard I saw the wood move. I let the room settle. I said, she should have been more careful about what she signed up for. A woman working overnight shifts 6 nights a week at $16.20 an hour, lifting 500 pounds of linen a night to pay her son's tuition in cash. She should have been more careful about what she signed up for. I said, that is now on the record, in your words. And that is when a man stood up in the 4th row. Nobody had subpoenaed him. Nobody had called his name. He was wearing a maintenance uniform with a Bellhaven Grand patch on the sleeve. And he had, I learned afterward, used a personal day to be there. His name was Ruben Salas. He was the security officer who had responded to the 3:40 a.m. noise complaint. He said, Your Honor, may I say something? I said, You are not a party to this proceeding, Mr. Salas. He said, I know. I'm here because I've worked with Adese for 6 years, and I know what she is. And I filed a report the night of October 1st that nobody ever asked me about. I said, Come forward. Ruben Salas walked to the front of my courtroom, holding a folded piece of paper he had printed from the hotel's own incident system before he came, because he had been afraid, his word, in open court, that it would not be there if he waited. It was his 3:40 a.m. incident report, and in it he had written that when he responded to the complaint, a guest opened the suite door holding an open bottle of champagne, and that he had observed damage to a mirror visible through the doorway of the primary bathroom. At 3:40 in the morning, 3 hours before Adese Nuosu ever set foot on that floor, he had documented it that night. He had filed it that night, and in the 4 days between that report and Adese Nuosu's termination, not one person in that hotel's risk department had opened it, because opening it would have meant contradicting a guest whose family name was on 2 hospital buildings. Ruben Salas earns $19 an hour. He used a personal day and risked his job to walk into a courtroom and hand me a piece of paper. The gallery stood up, not all at once, in pieces, and I did not stop them. I turned to the front row. I said, Ms. Nuosu, would you like to address this court? She stood. She did not use notes. She said, Your Honor, I have cleaned rooms for 18 years. I have cleaned for guests who were kind and guests who were not. I have worked nights since I was 28 years old, so my son could sleep at a normal hour and study at a normal hour and be a normal person. She said, I know that hotel. I know which service elevator runs slow. I know the ice machine on 11 coughs before it works. I know which guests leave trays outside the door and which ones leave them on the bed. 9 years. I know that building. She paused. She said, on the 2nd of October, I found a broken mirror, and I reported it because that is what you do. Nobody was in that room. Nobody would have known. I reported it at 6:41 in the morning because it was the job, and I have never once not done the job. Her voice moved once, and she brought it back. She said, and then a woman who does not know my name said one sentence at a desk downstairs, and 9 years was gone. My certificates are in a drawer. My car is gone. My son offered to stop school for me. She looked at Carolyn Ashworth Price for the first time. She said, I am not a category. My name is Adese Nuosu. I have a son who is going to be a nurse. I came here today because I want him to see that a person can say her own name in a room like this and be heard. The room was completely still. I saw the court reporter stop and then start again. I said, Ms. Ashworth Price, on the claim of defamation per se, wrongful interference with employment, and the associated damages, I find in favor of the plaintiff. I said, an accusation of criminal conduct is defamation per se. It requires no proof of additional harm because the harm is presumed and severe. In this case, it does not need to be presumed. It has been documented 11 times over in 11 rejected applications. Here is what this court orders: full compensatory damages for lost wages, past and projected, calculated against her 9-year earnings record and the industry evidence submitted. Damages for defamation per se, in an amount reflecting that you selected your target specifically because you believed she could not fight back, and that when the evidence was placed in front of you in open court, your response was that she should have been more careful about what she signed up for. Full attorney's fees payable to the clinic, not to you. A written retraction issued under your name, delivered to the Bellhaven Grand and to every property in this metropolitan area that received notice of this accusation. Ms. Nuosu's name has been in circulation for 4 months. This court intends for the correction to travel exactly as far as the accusation did, and 200 hours of community service to be completed on the overnight custodial shift of a public facility in this county, not as a donor, not as a board member, on the shift, at night, doing the work. I said, "You called me hired help." I said, "Ms. Nuosu has been hired help for 18 years. Mr. Salas has been hired help for 6. He used a personal day and risked his employment to hand this court a piece of paper that nobody asked him for." That is what those words actually describe. People who do the work correctly when there is no audience and no reward and no one checking. I said, if your family funded 3 wings of this courthouse, then they funded a building constructed around exactly one idea, that what happened in this room today is possible. I would suggest that is a better return than anything you have said this morning. I struck the gavel. 4 months later, I received a letter. It was from Daniel Mosu. He graduates in May. He has accepted a position on a night shift medical surgical unit at a hospital in this city. Nights, he wrote, because he grew up on his mother's schedule and it feels normal to him. He wrote that his mother is working again, not in hotels. A hospital environmental services department hired her after the retraction went out, and the director who hired her told her that a person who documents damage at 6:41 in the morning, when nobody is watching, is exactly who you want in a hospital. He wrote that she hung the 2 certificates on the wall, both of them. He said she still thinks it is bragging. And he wrote one more thing that I have kept in my desk drawer. He wrote, she has 3 things on that wall now: the 2 certificates and the retraction letter. She says the retraction is the one that matters because the certificates say she did the job well, but the letter says she did the job honestly, and anyone can be told they're good at something. I also received word about Carolyn Ashworth Price. She completed her hours. The facility supervisor's report noted that she was difficult for the first several weeks, that she spoke to the other night custodial staff the way you speak to people you assume are there to receive instructions. In week 6, something shifted. A woman on that crew, a 61-year-old grandmother named Ruth, who had worked nights for 22 years, was struggling with a form for a housing application. Carolyn Ashworth Price sat with her in a break room at 3 o'clock in the morning and filled it out with her. It took 90 minutes. The supervisor wrote that it was the first time she had done something for another person on that crew without being told to, without an audience, and without anything to be gained from it. I do not know whether Carolyn Ashworth Price becomes a different person. I have watched transformation happen in this courtroom, and I have watched it fail. Both, many times. But I believe in the possibility. I have to. That is why I still put the robe on. Here is what I do know. Adese Nuosu documented that damage at 6:41 in the morning. There was no one in that suite. There was no camera pointed at her. There was no supervisor, no bonus, no recognition, and no version of that morning in which reporting it made her life easier. She did it anyway, because that is what the job was. And 4 months later, a security officer earning $19 an hour used a personal day to walk into a courtroom with a piece of paper because that was also what the job was, even though nobody had told him so. That is the entire case. Not the sentence, not the censor log, not the money. Two people who did the work right when nobody was watching, and one person who assumed that meant nobody ever would. If you watched this all the way through, you are the reason I keep telling these. Drop a comment. Tell me your city: Istanbul, Chicago, Manila, Berlin, Lagos, Sao Paulo. I want to see how far this one goes. And tell me the other thing. Have you ever been made invisible by somebody who should have known your name? I read every single one. Subscribe, because next week there is another file and another person who needed this room to work correctly, and I will be here. And join, because Ruben Salas used a personal day to bring a piece of paper into a courtroom that nobody asked him for. Members are the version of that for this channel. Nobody is making you. It just means the next file gets opened. And share this one right now, not in an hour. Send it to somebody who cleans, who cares, who carries. Send it to somebody who needs to know that Adese Nuosu stood up in a courtroom, said her own name, and the whole room listened. Justice is not a guarantee. It is a choice. Choose it every single time.